the wax candle. The 19th century witnessed an era of rapid innovation, first oil lamps, then coal gas-powered lamps, then kerosene lamps, and finally Edison's electric filament bulbs. Innovation continued into the 20th century with fluorescent bulbs, the 1930s, and compact fluorescent bulbs, the 1980s. Newer technologies, such as light-emitting diodes, LEDs, continue the evolutionary process. Over this period, residential lighting became much brighter and more reliable, and cheaper. Around 1800, lighting services we take for granted today imposed a high economic cost on even the wealthiest individuals. Thomas Jefferson's household consumed approximately 200 pounds of candles in a year, and his total lighting expenditures were roughly $250 per year, or 7% of his annual salary as Secretary of State. It took 5.4 hours of work at the average farm laborer rate to produce 1,000 lumen hours of light in 1800, while in 1992, this same amount of light could be paid for by just 0.43 seconds of work at the average hourly non-farm rate. Put differently, the average cost of residential lighting in 1992 was 0.03% of what it was in 1800. Contrast the story of innovation in residential lighting to innovations in treating high cholesterol. Among adults in rich countries, a large proportion of all deaths are due to blocked arteries. Over the past century, an impressive body of biochemical, biomedical, and epidemiological research established that lowering low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, LDL, or bad cholesterol, through diet and medications reduces the incidence of coronary artery disease and coronary events, and also prolongs life. In the late 1980s, a new class of drugs for lowering LDL in the blood, statins, was approved for human use. Subsequent clinical trials have established that statins decrease heart attacks and prolong life. A new class of LDL cholesterol-lowering drugs, PCSK9 inhibitors, were recently discovered that exploit a different physiological mechanism than statins. Two new drugs in this class, evolocumab and alirocumab, reduced LDL cholesterol in the blood. It is worth noting that these trials were of relatively short duration. Because coronary artery disease develops slowly over many years, the trials relied on biomarkers, indicators of a therapeutic response, rather than actual clinical outcomes, such as strokes and heart attacks, to assess efficacy. As a result, the trials offered only indirect evidence that these new drugs reduce disease and prolong life. The initially approved uses for PCSK9 inhibitors were quite narrow and were focused on patients with a genetic disorder that makes it impossible for their bodies to remove LDL from the blood, or on other patients who need to achieve a very low level of LDL. Later, the approved use of evolocumab expanded to include adults with cardiovascular disease at risk of heart attack or stroke. Further expansion of alirocumab's approved uses is likely forthcoming. The initial list prices for PCSK9 inhibitors exceeded $14,000 per patient per year. This is a high price, considering that patients must take cholesterol-lowering drugs regularly throughout their lives. Much less expensive alternatives are available, some costing only a few $100s annually. The high initial prices of PCSK9 inhibitors matter for patients. Only half of the prescriptions for PCSK9 inhibitors were approved in the year these drugs became